Hello and welcome to the interview on France 24. Our guest today is the former National Security Advisor for the Trump administration, John Bolton. We shall discuss his latest book that has been released a few weeks ago entitled The Room Where It Happened. Welcome, Mr. Bolton.
Well, thank you. Glad to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Firstly, what were the motives behind writing this book?
Well, I thought it was very important to record what happened on a number of key national security issues during the 17 months I was National Security Advisor. Most Americans obviously don't get a full understanding of how some of these critical decisions are made, and I thought it was especially important for them to understand what happened in the Trump administration, how some of the decisions were arrived at. So it's open for them to read the book and draw their own conclusions and make up their own mind whether they think that's the direction the country ought to take.
In your book, you criticize Trump's foreign policy and point out that several of the initiatives he has taken in that regard have been fueled by his personal interests and not those of his country. Does that apply to Trump's stance on Iran, to which you have dedicated 2 chapters of your book?
Well, I think he was very much opposed to the 2015 Iran nuclear deal during his campaign. Certainly, I was opposed to that deal, and it was one of the issues that I felt very important that after almost 15 months in his presidency, he had still not been able to withdraw from. I think he saw the deal as being very unpopular in the United States, so I was happy to see us withdraw. At the same time, we did impose very substantial economic sanctions on Iran, which have had a devastating effect on its economy. Just this week, the Iranian currency has reached its lowest level ever against the dollar. But at the same time, Trump is still eager to try and negotiate with the Ayatollahs, thinking that he can get a better deal, which I think is far from the truth. So again, this goes to prove the point that it's not because of a grand strategy of American national security, but really Trump's assessment of what the politics are of how he adjusts American policy on Iran.
Mr. Bolton, the American media has long considered you as one of Washington's hawks, and President Trump even said that you had a penchant for war. Do you believe today that Trump's decision to back off at the last minute from attacking Iran, which you had encouraged him to do back then, was wise?
Well, let's not forget, as I explain in the book, all of his advisors, all of them, recommended retaliating for the strike against the American drone and Iran's earlier conduct in the Gulf, attacking installations in Saudi Arabia, attacking shipping coming from the Gulf. And what I was trying to point out there was that the process that had been followed to reach that decision was kind of textbook Washington, how you make a serious decision in the national security area. And his decision not to follow through was based on an anecdote at the last minute without any others being consulted. So some may approve of his actual decision not to retaliate, but by following this very erratic, unstructured approach, he could easily decide precisely the opposite in another situation. So the question is how decisions are best made in the national interest of the United States, not simply by Trump's gut reaction to a late-breaking development.
After resigning from the Trump administration, the president ordered the killing of the Iranian general Qasem Soleimani by adopting the maximum pressure policy on Tehran. Isn't this policy linked to the influence of Washington's regional allies, like Israel, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates?
Well, I'm not going to get into the specifics of Soleimani, but I'll just say that whenever you see an operation that produces some result, it would be a mistake to believe it was ordered a few days beforehand. Sometimes things are long in preparation, and the exact timing depends on circumstances, not from events that may have preceded them by a few days or so. Soleimani was a terrorist. He was a key official in a regime that the United States had designated a state sponsor of terrorism going back to the Reagan administration. His organization, the Revolutionary Guards, had been designated by Trump as itself a terrorist organization. And we know that for over a decade, Iran had been responsible for arming people inside Iraq who killed Americans. So I think this was entirely justified and would have been justified solely on the basis of American national interest.
Still with regards to the Middle East, why have you considered in your book the Syrian conflict to be the worst performance of the Trump administration?
Well, I didn't say it was the worst. There's a lot of competition for that distinction, but the president was not consistent in his own decision making. He would order American withdrawal, then change his mind, then go back to it, change his mind again. And much of the decision making was not done, I think, in an orderly strategic fashion, which gave opportunities for Iran, for the Assad regime, for Russia, for Turkey to advance their interest on the Syrian territory at the expense of America's and its allies in the region.
Some believe the endorsement of the Caesar Act will allow the U.S. to regain a certain role in Syria. Do you agree?
Well, I think it depends on how Trump plays the next few months. I don't really anticipate that there's going to be much decision making on Syria or much else internationally before the election. And then obviously what comes next depends on who wins.
Mr. Bolton, did you play a role in what is known as Trump's peace plan in the Middle East? And what are the chances, in your opinion, of this initiative in succeeding?
Well, I think along with a lot of other people, we gave advice on it. It was largely the product of Jared Kushner's efforts. I think that it's unlikely that it will succeed if Trump is reelected. If he's not reelected, I don't think we're going to see any trace of it after that. Where it was correct, I think, was in seeing that there was a general strategic realignment underway in the Middle East as a whole, and that the threat posed by Iran, by its nuclear weapons program, by its support for terrorist activities, its destabilizing influence in Iraq and Syria and Lebanon, and its threats to the rest of the region really provide an incentive for the Gulf Arabs and others to try and find solutions to their disagreements with Israel. And I think that strategic shift survives. It's really a very significant change in the region overall because of the nature of the Iranian threat. And since that change is likely to persist for a while, then I think possibilities for peace between Israel and all the Arabs, including the Palestinians, remain. But I think it's going to take a new initiative to get it started again.
You mention in your book the personal ties that link President Trump to his Turkish counterpart Erdogan. Is this relationship the reason why Washington hasn't condemned Ankara's military intervention in Libya, or are there other considerations behind this position?
Well, I don't think really the fullest kind of attention has been given to Libya. I think it in part reflects Trump's unwillingness to try and plan out strategies other than on an ad hoc daily basis. Obviously, Europe is much more immediately concerned with the potential for chaos in Libya, the ongoing civil war there. And it was something that Trump's interest would kind of fade in and fade out, something that was all too typical of his approach to many international events.
Last question, Mr. Bolton. When reading your book, it seems clear that you are against Trump's re-election. Why is that?
Well, I don't think that Trump is a conservative Republican. That's not to say I think he's a liberal Democrat. I don't think he has a philosophy. I think he's for Donald Trump. And I think his personalized view of the world, his transactional approach, his lack of strategic thinking, really his lack of understanding of much of what the rest of the world faces on a daily basis makes it hard to protect American interest. So for the first time in my adult life, I'm not going to vote for the Republican Party nominee for president. I'm not going to vote for Joe Biden either. I'm going to write in the name of someone else. But it's not a happy election for those of us who view national security through the Ronald Reagan prism. And it's going to be a difficult time for America, I think, whatever the outcome on Election Day.
Allow me to ask you just one last question on how you view the relationship between Trump and his French counterpart, President Emmanuel Macron.
Well, I think President Macron made a decision early on he would try and cultivate a personal relationship with Trump. I thought that was sensible because of Trump's frequent inability to distinguish between his personal relations with a foreign leader and the actual bilateral relationship between the two countries. I think Macron actually sized Trump up very well. I think that was beneficial for Macron and France, but not beneficial for the United States. Iran was a good example. Macron wanted to do everything he could to save the Iran nuclear deal, and Trump didn't appreciate, didn't understand, didn't see what Macron was frequently trying to do. Since I think the deal is a big mistake, not just for the United States, but for the West as a whole, I think France's policy was wrong. But Macron's ability to play Trump certainly worked to his advantage.
Mr. John Bolton, former advisor of national security, thank you, and thank you for watching us. Stay tuned on France 24. Goodbye.